that's their job as committee members. And as committee members, they work for everyone in the state.
I just want to encourage everybody as well, what Linda says is right, and also, even if you have a senator or a representative who you think generally is aligned with you on this issue, that shares your concern about gun violence prevention, that you call them and ask them to do more. There's a very large Second Amendment caucus among the Republicans in our state house. There's a very tiny gun violence prevention caucus. We could all be asking those who represent us, who share our concerns, to join that caucus and make it a stronger element of one of the two parties' representation here in our state house. That's something they can do. They can be more proactive about this issue. Gun violence prevention should be a bipartisan issue. It really should be. Who is for gun violence? No one. So we should be reaching out and asking members of both sides of the aisle to be doing more on this issue. And even if there's not a bill sitting on their desk or sitting in their committee, if this is important to you, you should speak with them and ask them to talk with their colleagues who share their concerns and be more proactive about it.
Yeah, I just want to say this is also not just a state legislative issue, but it's a local issue. So gun deaths now exceed traffic deaths. What are you doing? And this is, what are we doing when we go to our township boards, when we go to our county boards, when we go to our city boards? What is your council doing? What is your township doing? What is the Michigan State Police doing? You know, when you go and you call the Michigan State Police, your local post, or you call your local sheriff, or you call your local chief and say, gun deaths now exceed traffic deaths. What are you doing in this township? What are you doing in this state? What are you doing in this city? When you call your health department, gun deaths now exceed traffic deaths. What are you doing? We can all drive around our communities here and see flashing signs telling you your speed, trying to get you to slow down. Well, that's great. What are you doing about gun deaths? So we can't just lay it all at our legislators. We have to take maybe a multifaceted or multi-layer approach to this and ask this question time and time again. What are you doing? What's the plan? We met with the Michigan State Police and we just basically laid it out to them that way and said, what's the plan? What are you doing? Your website says you're the leader in law enforcement in the state of Michigan. What's the plan? And it really caught them off guard, and it was very difficult.
Yeah, I would like to tell you a minute about an experience I had today. I went to the State Board of Education, and I encouraged the State Board of Education to take a strong position relative to 584. And they did not do it. It did not go through. And then another person on the State Board of Education tried to refer the question to their legislative committee to come back to the State Board of Education as a whole with a recommendation about what are we going to do about guns in our schools. I mean, they're sort of at the top of the education piece, right? So, I mean, that's another place that you can intervene. We will be at the December 12th State Board of Education meeting. They will allow us to speak just like you can go in and testify. But Scott's got a really important point. What we're reaping now with the gun lobby is something that they have been building toward for 20 odd years. It used to be a shooting sports, the NRA used to, Scott speaks of his parents and his grandparents belonging to the NRA, but they're totally different. They have the time and the wherewithal to run candidates for boards of education at the local level, for city councils at the local level, county boards. So you need to be asking every time you go to a town hall or a council meeting, what is your position on gun violence prevention? We should ask that of every single candidate starting today and forever. What is your position on gun violence prevention? Because the NRA is taking the time to pack school boards. I was talking earlier about open carry being allowed in schools. That's winding its way through the courts, But local school boards are kind of all over the map with that, and we need them to be with us. So you can get involved at, any sort of political level.
Well, actually, if it's okay, I just wanted to pivot, sort of in an anti-pivot, just an issue that I wanted to make sure got addressed. And when we're talking about things to say to our legislators, and in anticipation that the mental health issue will come up, it's inevitable that legislators are going to say this is a mental health problem. We heard our president say exactly that after the horrific events in Las Vegas. So as a psychiatrist, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. People diagnosed with mental health problems are much more likely to be victims rather than perpetrators of gun violence. And that mental illness alone, as a single factor, may be responsible for, it's estimated, 4% of interpersonal violence, and other factors such as a history of violence in the past, a history of substance abuse, a history of domestic violence. All of those are way more predictive of violence than a history of mental illness. So in your efforts in reaching out to the people that represent you, please be on guard and don't let them pull the mental health pivot and try and sway you away from the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonya. It's an important thing. I think this last discussion has been, I think, very helpful in terms of helping to frame what can we do, where do we go, and looking beyond the narrow, the legislature, not excluding the legislature, but including all other areas where decisions are made about our children, whether that be the school board, police. I wonder about prosecutors, where they might be, and looking for who might be other allies in this effort to make sure that our children are safe. And I don't know where the prosecuting attorneys are. Can anybody shed some light on what other groups of people and institutions are also actively involved in trying to make sure that our children are not subject to gun violence?
Well, when we testified against permitless carry in Michigan, all of the law enforcement groups were totally with us on that. They want the permitting process to be in place. So that's one thing. The prosecutors, particularly, I think I talked about how Kim Worthy is really leading statewide on prosecuting adult owners of guns when a child gets a hold of one. So I'm sure that our local prosecutor in Ingham County is definitely understanding of all our issues and is supportive. And anytime I have had an opportunity to talk to a prosecutor, they are absolutely with us. We had a forum a while ago, and someone was there from the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office. It was on the extremist protection order, and all of these things that save lives are going to be supported by prosecutors. I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, they're in the business of saving lives, right? So.
Any other questions from people in the audience? That's all the cards that I have. Yes.
I just was remembering that a friend, when I was discussing my concerns in this area, was saying, oh yes, the murder rate is way down in the country. Apparently it is, compared to 20 or 30 years ago. And therefore, having all these guns is really not a problem.
So the claim has been that murder is way down, and violent, as I understand, violent crime is down. And how does that square with?
Yeah. I mean, we're living in a time that's relatively safe compared to the 1990s when the rate of violent crime was much higher than it is now, like the late 80s and early 90s. But it's not true that if we look not at the aggregate, but we actually look at the time series data within states, as you look at how states change their state laws with respect to public safety protections and gun policy, what you see is within a state over time, as gun protections are released, rates of gun homicides and suicides go up, which is actually much stronger data because we're looking within the same geographic area, changes in legal status over time being directly followed by changes in rates of gun deaths following. And so, that it's kind of a reasoning by analogy, but it's actually not the right data frame to look at for answering this question. We're much safer than we used to be. The gun lobby would not like us to believe that. They would like us to believe that it's actually a much more violent country right now than it is because that sells guns. But what is happening is within states that have loosened public safety protections, we see subsequent declines in safety. People are much more at risk. Missouri is the state that's most recently enacted lots of sweeping gun legislation that removed many of their public safety protections, and they've seen an increase even just over the past year in gun homicides. So when you look at the data that way, it's inconsistent with what your friend is offering.
What they don't like to talk about is suicide rates. So that's always been carved off as a separate issue that we can do nothing about. Well, that's not correct. And that's not what that research shows us. The Duke study in Connecticut found that 99% of the extreme risk protection orders that were issued, they found firearms in those homes. And that of those firearms, they found 7, on average, ownership. So they don't want to talk about the suicide rate. They don't want to talk about gun violence in relationship to gun violence. They just want to talk about murder, or they want to talk about things like that. So this is a real tricky issue. Pushing back on this and including suicides in this figure.
Yes.
I hope we're all ready to go to the governor if those bills get passed and they take out the school thing and they also stop the open carry, because he's going to be our final one. So we've got to be screaming and getting ready to fight that. We need to all watch that.
Yes, thank you. And there was a question back here.
Really important point.
There was a gentleman, I think he just won in Virginia against the man that was funded by the NRA. So, activate, call Rick Jones.
Yeah.
It takes 5 minutes. Thank our legislators for doing what we asked them to do. And then finally, because the cost of gun violence is so high, we've had those gun buyback programs. Can we do more of those? Would that be advantageous to help get the guns off the streets?
I mean, it's hard to say that's a really politically viable step in our current political climate. One possible suggestion I would make that's kind of taking a different tact. Sometimes you'll also hear people talk about illegal guns and illegal behavior, and criminals don't follow laws. One really important source of illegal guns in our country is guns stolen out of automobiles. A very common occurrence is that people leave guns unsecured in a car, and the gun is then stolen from the car, which thus turns a legal gun into an illegal one. And some cities across our country have had very successful programs in enacting local ordinances around securing guns in automobiles that have resulted in lower rates of gun thefts out of cars, which subsequently closes down some of that gun trafficking, which is a really important thing. Scott mentioned before, working at different levels. Cities are actually some of the biggest innovators in terms of new gun policies because they can work on things in a way that state legislatures, which are often very slow moving. And so that's one potential way to remove more illegal guns off the street. And
Michigan does not have a law that you have to report if your gun is lost or stolen. You don't have to report that. So there is that also, a great source of illegal guns. And there's no gun manufacturer that's putting out a gun that's not legal. The first time it's sold, it probably is. The trouble is, in Michigan, there are no background checks on private sales. So only if you buy a gun at a federally licensed dealer is there a background check. So there is that. Regarding the buybacks, That, I think, has potential, perhaps not to address the huge numbers of guns that are out there, but it is a wonderful public awareness kind of tool. And it also is the one that gets Uncle Johnny, who died 10 years ago's gun off the third shelf of the second bedroom, right? Those kinds of guns are taken out of circulation. That was one of our first efforts here in Lansing when LPD had a buyback. Julie, we were there. And they got 126 guns off the streets of Lansing, 3 of which were AR-type guns. So I think there is some efficacy. They're expensive. You know, the funding question is there. But there's going to be a national gun buyback December 16th. And I'm sure if you Google that, you could find out what cities that's happening in.
I want to speak just a little bit about the frustration you may feel from maybe your legislature in your area doesn't really support common sense gun legislation, and you feel kind of hopeless a little bit sometimes. Find someone who does. It could be locally or it could be nationally. I mean, so there's 100 Senate votes, right? U.S. Senate votes, 100 votes. There's a race going on in Alabama right now. You have one candidate who's going to cast a ballot on a national gun bill someday. So you got one candidate who won his primary and got up on stage and spun a gun around on his finger. And you have another candidate. So, you know, if you know how your 2 senators are going to vote, maybe there's another race that you should look at. Maybe that other person could, like a $10 donation or something. I don't know. But there's these races going on everywhere. And we thought kind of a lot of times it's just me. It's just locally. I really don't have a voice. Well, I went up and was doing some lobbying at the Senate. And right ahead of me in line was Tom Lambert. And Tom Lambert is the head of Open Carry Michigan. Gun on his hip, and he's going up to see a senator. Well, I tell you, every day that we're not there, they're there. Every day we don't call, they're calling. And like I said, if you don't have a sympathetic ear, find someone who is. I know that Robert Wittenberg, when he introduced an assault weapons ban bill here last legislative cycle, got inundated with hate mail from around the country. He was blasted. You know, it's nice when these people not in your area get a call and say, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. I'm not your constituent, I'm not in your area, but I support what you're doing.
Okay, we are out of time. So thank you very much to our panel. And I would remind people that there are materials in the back from each of the viewpoints, as well as League of Women Voters. And I'd like to ask Camilla Davis, who is our co-president for the League of Women Voters of the Lansing area, to kind of close us out.
Okay, we'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, and especially our wonderful panel. This has been quite an experience. So I have lots of notes. I just want to say something about the League. The League, through process of study and consensus, does take positions on public policy issues. We're not a political organization in the sense that we support or oppose candidates or political parties, but we do lobby our elected officials to advance the positions that we support. And we are certainly advocates for violence prevention and gun control, which is the reason that our wonderful gun violence prevention work group organized these. And I'd like to thank Marty Cortez for all her work, and her committee, Melinda Frame and Trudy Bauer, and did I miss anybody? Okay. And then I think we have 2 ladies covering the table back there who are in your other group. Trudy has, or excuse me, Marty has 2 hats that she wears in this area. Okay, I just want to say a couple things to you about League of Women Voters. If you like what you saw tonight or heard tonight, this is the kind of thing that we do on public policy issues. So we would encourage you to join us. There is, I need another hand. There, thank you. Okay. We have a nice membership brochure back there. This organization is open to both men and women, 16 years of age and older. So we do encourage you to join us. And also, we would really appreciate it if you would fill out this form about how you heard about this program. Trudy, Trudy is back there with forms. Take you about 30 seconds. You don't have to identify yourself. We will not call you. But we'd like to know. We have a really good publicity person who's always working to improve getting the word out. So thanks so much for coming, and we hope to see you at another program. Okay.